Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello and welcome to Gender and Society. This is lecture number 5 on the history of women's movement. So, we have seen in the past lectures how the concept of gender has evolved over time, and we have seen certain debates that have been classical, that are ongoing, and some of these significant debates are with respect to the biological condition of the human body versus gender as a concept. So, what we will do in this lecture is to look at some of the key moments in the history of women's movement, and then we will talk about whether we are in a phase of global women's movement or it's an international women's movement. So, what are the conceptual differences between the two? What is the status of gender inequality across the world with respect to these movements, and we will finally look at some of the current ongoing women's movements globally. So, this is in a nutshell what we are going to be talking about in this lecture, and with this background premise in the lecture after this, we will be looking at some of the key theories of feminism. So, to start with, one of the significant points of starting to talk about the origin of the women's movement is to look at the feminist anthropology in the 1970s. So, we see that the origin and mechanism of oppression to understand the changing women's position in society has been in that point of time an ongoing conversation for feminists who were pursuing an anthropological way of inquiry. So, it all boils down, as Rosaldo in 1974 talked about, that sexual asymmetry is presently a universal fact of human social life. So, as we have seen, the biological condition of the body continues to inform much of the differences, much of the discrimination that we see in society, and Rosaldo pointed out back in 1974 that it was emerging as a universal fact of social life, and women's oppression was seen as universal with varying manifestations. So, the idea that women were oppressed around the world was coming out as universal. So, as more and more people got together, more and more groups got together, societies exchange views. So, as these networks flourished, we see that the idea of women's oppression became a universal issue to deal with varying manifestations. So, the nature of oppression would be different, but then the issue would remain constant as oppression. So, this actually put several scholars to look at then if there is a relationship between how we understand the female is to male dynamic with regard to how we understand the nature is to culture dynamic. So, Sherry Ortner actually posed this question, that is female is to male as nature is to culture, and I quote, "What could there be in the generalized structure and conditions of existence common to every culture that would lead every culture to place a lower value upon women?" So, as you can see from the quote, Ortner in 1974 was questioning that we see this generalized structure, this generalized pattern of oppression, and what is it that that is probably true for every culture across the globe, every society across the globe, that would lead every culture to place a lower value upon women. So there must be something that's going on across societies that actually puts forward this universal trend. So more and more scholars became interested to find out that why is such a thing happening, and the generalized structure in human societies which makes women appear inferior was proposed by most of these scholars, that just like nature is universally valued less than culture, we see that there is an equation which kind of follows this logic of superior inferior, if there is one, is that females are often equated with nature and males are often equated with culture, and nature is often universally valued less than culture, and by that equation we see that across human societies there is a low signifying factor being attached to women across the world. So here we need to revisit the idea of the biological condition of the body, and then the transition to gender, and we see that there has been feminist anthropological discourse, particularly one that was put forward by Gail Rubin in 1975, who borrowed from classic anthropologists like Levi-Strauss, psychological influences from Freud and Lacan, and it was put forward that biological sex and sexuality became socially significant when translated into cultural codes of gender. So it comes back to the same origin, that across societies more and more the idea of biological sex was being codified as gender. So it was being codified as synonymous to gender, and this was even all the more becoming significant when the two were equated. So this was one of the starting points to understand where do several of the women's movements that we have seen historically and we see now, we see today, come from. There has been an epistemological claim in this regard also, that despite all diversity encountered in women's oppression, there were sufficient similarity between women's experiences. So once it was established that women's oppression is a universal fact, it's a universal issue, and it was also seen that despite all the diversity, so there there were different manifestations of these oppressions, and despite that diversity, there were tremendous amount of similarity in the nature of women's experiences in societies. And then power relationships in this regard were assumed to be universally the same, and with that assumption comes the danger of making women and men being assumed as homogeneous categories, as we have talked about previously, that when we assume that all women across the world are same and all men across the world are same, and they have the same experience, that is all men have same experience and all women have same experience, we are running into the danger of conceptualizing that each of these categories are homogeneous, that there is no difference. We are assuming that there is no difference between amongst women or amongst men. So when this is a point of interrogation, that when we talk of these power relationships, then are these power relationships assumed to be universal? Are they constant? Are they the same everywhere across the globe? So in the 1970s going into the 1980s, we see that there was this constant effort of correcting the androcentric bias, whether it was in academia, whether it was in networks, whether it was in organizations. So there was this an effort towards correcting the androcentric bias. The power dynamics of these spheres, that is the public private binary, as was emerging around this time, was also looked at, that how is this public private dichotomy emerging, and does it make sense at all to talk about these as two different spheres, the idea of the spheres, and does it make sense to signify one sphere as women's sphere and one sphere as men's sphere. So the power dynamics in these spheres, of course, could not be overlooked. There were very significant power geometries that were emerging, and the public private binary, the binary of the spheres, were something that this decades actually focused on. And the other point that this decades also focused on was the power dynamics of Western feminist studies and the third world women. And here I quote Chandra Mohanty, that reproducing or representing a composite singular third world woman, an image which appears arbitrarily constructed but nevertheless carries with it the authorizing signature of Western humanist discourse. So not just between the spheres, not just between the women's and men's spheres, these power dynamics were also seen in scholarship, in discourse, emerging from the Western feminist studies, and also with the emergence of the category of the third world women, that how are these categories then constructed, and what informs these forms of power negotiations within and between such categories. So we see that if we have to look at some of the global contexts for an emerging women's movement, we see that the United Nations has been at the forefront for facilitating and addressing to facilitating solutions and addressing to several of these issues. And we see that the UN development decades of 1960s and 1970s actually focused on three primary points: equality, development, and peace. So for equality, the focus was on Western democracies. For development, the focus was on third world countries in the the economic south, and for peace the focus was the Soviet bloc, and these were based on neoclassical economic theories which held that wealth generated from economic growth would trickle down to the poor and thus reduce poverty. The market in this case for the neoclassical economic theories was assumed to be the engine of economic growth, and together with the United Nations, the World Bank also played a very important role in promoting these strategies. So what we see that by the end of this debate or by the end of this decade, that it was evident that the market alone could not reduce poverty, and several of these objectives were not achieved. So based on this neoclassical economic theoretical model, the United Nations proposed for the one of the pioneering ways of understanding where can we contextualize a global idea of a women's movement. And then we also see that there was an a focus on understanding whether these movements are international movements, or whether these movements are global movements. So we see that in the background to the decade for women, which is the 1975-1985, the decade for the UN decade for women, we see that there were three factors or three movements identified that actually contributed to the birth of the decade of the women, the UN decade for the women in 1975 to 85. So, the first of these movements was the women's rights movement, which comes from the movement of for women's suffrage that came up in the 19th century as a common cause for women. And then we see the the human rights movement, which was where the UN had been a major player for the human rights movement, and we see the Universal Declaration on Human Rights was adopted by the world body in 1948. And we have the movements against colonialism, which kind of identified struggles within larger processes of class struggle and national liberation. So, you see that the background that led to the to the decade for women actually came with it having identified that there were already tensions that contributed to the women's movement. So, there were some key features that women's movement in general had. So, it was any women's movement, as Antrobus points out, that any movement is any women's movement is a political movement aimed at changing social conditions. So, there are these inherent ideas towards changing the society towards better, and so they have a political agenda, a political movement. Understanding of women's relations to social conditions, which requires an understanding of gender within the broader structures of race, class, ethnicity, age and location. So, how do you understand with the intersectionality framework? So, we talked about the idea where gender can be and gender should be analyzed with regard to the other axis of differences, and so this was a call to understand women's relation to social conditions with regard to the broader structures as a process flexible related to conditions of gender inequality or gender related injustice. So, again a women's movement, any women's movement in this regard is never static. So, it is ongoing, it is a process, it is flexible, and it addresses either a global issue or a particular issue of gender inequality or gender related injustice at any given point of time and place. The awareness and rejection of patriarchal privilege. So, the emphasis on removing the androcentric bias is what much of these movements were going towards, is an awareness and a rejection of a patriarchal privilege in society. And such movements are usually born or they originate when alienation or marginalization is experienced. So, the question of agency and structure. So, when one can do and have access to resources and have an influence on the social structure. So, so these are some of the key characteristics, key points to keep in mind to understand where do all of these women's movement actually come from. So, we also see that the women's movement over time gave rise to several networks, and we see these networks in the form of associations, in the form of organizations, conferences. We see there are international days being celebrated, the UN International Women's Day, such as 8th March, the UN International Day Against Violence Against Women, 25th November. So, we see that there was this rising consciousness that not just accepting or becoming aware of the fact that there is a global sense of oppression across the globe for women, but also how can this variety, these varied ways of oppression, these varied natures of oppression, they are connected, and how can networks, organizations, associations work towards eradication, removal of such oppression globally. So, if you follow this link that you see on the screen, it will take you to a very nice list of key dates in international women's history that was compiled by the UN Foundation, and it shows you across the decades what have been some of these landmark movements, landmark events that actually mark several of these women's movement. So, we see that there were three waves or three sources of women's movement, and the first wave that is felt for the earlier women's movement had three sources. So, there were the the backdrop were the colonized countries. The second was the social democratic communist organizations, which is the late 19th, early 20th century, and the third source comes from the idea of reproductive health care. So, for the first source, the colonized countries, we do see there was an emergence of social reform movements aimed at transforming cultural practices around civil laws, marriage and family life. And much of these social reform movements were transforming social discourse around gender relations. So, we have seen that historically in the past couple of lectures that there was a history from where these social reform movements come, and much of these in the context of colonialism, in the context of colonized countries, we see that much of these discourses, much of these public debates around gender, they centered around civil laws of marriage and family life. The second source was the social democratic communist organizations, and it brings the women's question, the woman question as it is better known, to the focus that and later on the woman question was actually taken up by later scholars to understand the changing position of women in society, or the public debates that were centered around the women's position in society, but really were not catering to or were not crafted or not debated for the women, but only for the rest of the society. So, we also see that in the second source that the institution and ownership of private property formed bulk of this dialogue, and catered to the growth of the movement. The third source comes from the idea of reproductive health care, particularly with regard to legalizing contraception in Europe and North America. So, this was again a social shift with understanding rights over women's bodies, and the very fact that contraception was legalized in Europe and North America formed one of the very important basis for talking about the emerging or changing positions of women in society. So, the second source of the earlier movements come from the histories, the social histories of the mid 20th century, and the struggle against colonial domination. So, we see much of these debates actually come from the strive towards liberation, the anti-colonial movements, etc., and the experience shaping attitudes towards global and political inequality. So it was a a pan global issue that was felt. And the third source actually points out to the modern women's movement starting the 1960s as an anti-imperialist movement, which actually saw revisioning or changing some of the social and gender mores or principles or values, and a recognition of the personal as political. So as I was saying, that much of these debates were also carried on in the within the domain of family and marriage, the internal spheres, the intimate spheres of society, and the idea of the personal as political emerged around this time with the third source. So now the question is that, are we talking about an international women's movement, or are we talking about a global women's movement? So there are conceptually different, and the way they differ is that for an international women's movement, we ask questions such as, is an issue that is related here, is it crossing borders? So we are paying attention to nation states, we are paying attention to national boundaries, and we are asking questions that the national cultural difference is recognized. So that is much of the what the UN Decade for Women in 1975 to 85 addressed, that what are these national differences, what are the cultural differences that we see between nations, and how much of it is engaged in border crossing. So that is one way of understanding the international women's movement. For the global women's movement, we see that there was a realization of different axes, and economically speaking, there is an idea of the global north, a global south, and there were these policy debates that started to happen and have been ongoing at global scales on issues such as environment, poverty, violence, human rights, and ideas that actually stitch the globe together. So these are ideas, these are issues that we see across the globe. It is not just confined within a nation state, not just an issue of a particular country, but these are pan global, these are across the globe issues that the women's movement, the global women's movement tried to address. So this is conceptually how we understand the international women's movement versus the global women's movement. So now let's look at briefly what has some of the scholarship on women's movement in India focused on. So we find that there are three broad trends in scholarship, in scholarly inquiry, as we understand women's movement in India, and we see that these trends have been understanding poor women's movements, rural and urban, urban autonomous movements, and new social movements. So we see that the classic areas of violence and reproduction and the emerging need to move beyond these issues to development, ecology, and religion were attributed to the understanding of the poor women's movement, irrespective of whether it's rural or urban. And we see in the urban autonomous movement the trend that there was more focus, more impetus on understanding class and caste inequalities in the 1960s. So how have class and caste worked with gender in society to produce and reproduce several of these inequalities in the 1960s. And the new social movements, which I quote from Amved, is explicitly anti-systematic in their ideologies, looking towards a casteless, non-patriarchal, non-looting, sustainable society. They are involved in their own view in inherent conflict with the social order. So this is a new form of a social movement that is not exclusively rooted in caste, not exclusively rooted in gender or violence, but an impetus, but a movement that is geared towards achieving a sustainable society. So it is again another approach to understand from where the women's movements in India actually come from, and what have been the various foci, what has been the various emerging trends to understand the background of women's movement in India. With that, we have the example of the Stree Shakti, or the women power, where scholars such as Purkayastha and Omved have talked about it on a great deal, that revisiting and analyzing issues of gender, caste, ecology and rural living, and not just on women's oppression. So these scholars are extending pushing the dialogue to an arena that crosses the gender boundary, that crosses the caste, class boundary, and they are calling for an analysis to understanding the issues of gender, caste, ecology and rural living, beyond understanding women's oppression. So they are calling for an understanding of these issues towards a drive towards attaining a sustainable society. And Stree Shakti as an alternative model of development based on biomass production, renewable energy and the environment at the local level was something that these scholars talked about, that to bring in an alternative understanding of renewing the environment, addressing environmental issues at the local level. So as you can see that these the idea of the women's movement across the globe traveled a huge spectrum, and this is one of the examples where it is seen that it crosses the gender, caste boundary, and it talks about the larger society and the alternative models to end oppression. Scholars have also talked about the ancient Indian worldview of Prakriti, and here we have the idea of creation, or the feminine principle from which life arises, and this idea has been in the backdrop, in the root of many of the women's ecology movements historically. Preservation and recovery of the feminine principle arise from a non-gender based ideology of liberation. So it is seen that it is different both from the gender based ideology of patriarchy, women's subjugations and the gender based responses which have until recently been characteristic of the West. So basically it comes from an idea that it is not just rooted in gender, but it is a non-gender based ideology for liberation, different both from the gender based ideology of patriarchy and women's subjugation, and again talking of a society that is sustainable ecologically speaking. We also see a trend in the scholarship talking about violence against women, and this is a quite significant body of scholarship that has invested in understanding the various sources, reasons and impacts, the effects of violence in society, and much of the scholarship is either focusing on social movement driven types of activities, or the type of academic conversations. So as Purkayastha and others write, the definition of violence against women in India includes topics such as sex selective feticide, a recent form of violence, female infanticide and discrimination against women. So the umbrella of violence against women actually brings with it all of these types of violence that scholarship and social movement driven conversations have dealt with. So we see that given that backdrop, the UNDP actually has given us a gender inequality index, as you can see here, and it has identified health, empowerment and the labor market as three significant areas to be addressed to end inequality or move towards equality. So, for health, as you can see here, that paying attention to maternal mortality ratio, adolescent birth rate, and then influencing the female reproductive health index will form its chain through female gender index to the GII, or the gender inequality index. And the idea of empowerment, female and male population with at least secondary education, female and male shares of parliamentary seats, the female labor market index. So all of this would cater towards understanding of the status of empowerment, gender empowerment in any given society. And finally, the labor market talks about the female and male labor force participation rates, and then moving through the male gender index to the GII. So this is one of the ways, one of the holistic ways of understanding through the UNDP's GII, that what is the road ahead to address the issue of inequality and how to end it. We see that the Gender Development Index of the UNDP in 2015 actually has categorized countries according to very high human development, high human development, medium human development, and low human development. And going by that arrangement, we see the some of the top ranking countries here: Norway, Australia, Switzerland, Germany, Denmark, Singapore, Netherlands, Ireland, Iceland, Canada, and the US. And we see that India actually is 131st in the HDI rank, which falls within the medium human development category of the UNDP, with value of a gender development index value of 0.819 as of 2015. So you see that this is a long journey that a country still has to make to make its way up the ladder, but this is again a comparative idea with where India stands with regard to the other countries. The UNDP has also charted it out on a world map to show how the gender inequality in the world looks like. And on this map, as you can see, that several of these countries or areas are shaded dark, and several of them are shaded light. And you see that the ones that are shaded light have gender inequality less than 171. And then as you move towards the darker areas, you see that it increases, and particularly the areas that you see in South Asia, parts of South Asia, parts of Africa, that it registers a very high gender inequality according to this index. So this is in a nutshell the state of gender inequality across the world. It was compiled by Time in 2014, and it is available as an online resource. So you can go and check it out and see. It's interactive also. So how gender inequality is currently charted as of now. The United Nations Development Program has also identified 8 major areas to improve gender equality, starting with the autonomy of the body, that is control over reproduction and sexuality, and ending violence. So again, all the legislations, all the movements with regard to rights over women's body falls in this conversation. The autonomy within family and household, the freedom to marry, the freedom to divorce, the custody of children. So with all these issues with regard to the intimate sphere of life within the family, within the household, bringing in an autonomy. Political power with an increased role in decision making in governments, or amplifying women's voices in these decision making processes in the government, in administration. So, political power is one of the major areas that the UNDP has identified to improve gender equality. Social resources or access to healthcare and education, very important. They have charted out goals, Millennium Development Goals, to for betterment of healthcare, access to education, primary, secondary, tertiary education, and social resources, social capital, healthcare and education as social capital in this regard. Material resources, access to land, house, credit forms a major area to improve gender equality according to the United Nations. The employment and income structure, a fair distribution of paid and unpaid labor. So, paying more attention to how income and employment is distributed. Time. So, time management, relative access to leisure and sleep. So, this is where much of the conversation and debates also go on, that once we have the idea of the difference in spheres, the men's and the women's sphere, and if we have to accept that there is a private sphere and a public sphere, then what is also happening is more and more women are becoming visible in the formal labor force. So, time management is becoming a primary area of debate, of conversation, and in this respect the UNDP actually spells out very clearly that we need to address the issue of time with regard to relative access to leisure and sleep in order to improve gender equality. And gender identity, addressing problems with rigidity in gender division of labor. So, this goes back to the whole discussion of understanding gender through biological sex, and the problems that comes with that understanding, the challenges that come with that understanding, and the misleadings that come with that understanding. So, the UNDP calls for fluidity of gender identity, addressing that rigidity is not the answer, and rigidity in gender division of labor is not the answer. So, it needs to move beyond that, the conversation needs to move beyond that to improve gender equality. So, as you can see, these are the 8 major areas that the UNDP focuses on and urges nations, countries, groups, people to focus on in order to improve gender equality across the world. I do want to draw your attention to a very good documentary in this regard. It is called Pray the Devil Back to Hell, and it was it was in 2008, and it is in the backdrop of a social unrest in Western African Republic of Liberia, where you see that the Liberian women have come together to end a civil war that was ongoing, and their sole intention was to bring in peace to that place. And this documentary is a classic example of showing that how grassroots activism can be powerful enough to bring in ideas of nation building, to bring in changes nationally. So, if you get a opportunity, please take a look at this documentary, Pray the Devil Back to Hell. The other women's movement that is ongoing, and that is something that is we see in our current times, is the Half the Sky movement. So, this is a movement that was pioneered by 2 journalists, Cheryl Boudon and Nicholas Kristof, and they started this movement in an effort to fight and end oppression of women and girls globally. So we see that in this movement, in Half the Sky, it's again the resources with regard to Half the Sky are available everywhere. So as you will see, it addresses key issues of current times, such as sex trafficking, forced prostitution, gender-based violence, and maternal mortality. So these are the four major areas where Half the Sky actually concentrates on, and it has landmark movements of current times. So I encourage you to find out resources on Half the Sky to see what this current movement is about. And again, this is a short documentary as part of Half the Sky that you can watch online, the impact of India's caste system on women. So please take a look at it when you can to know about the movement better. So now I will take you through some of the very recent developments in terms of gender equality that was compiled by the UN Women, and this is again a resource that is available online. So please go online to look for this timeline, because there are way more examples than I am able to show you here. So one of the most significant examples towards gender equality that we have currently in 2017 was that leadership from African women. And as you can see here, that this was a landmark journey that was made on behalf of the African women. And so this is one of the landmark moments in recent women's movement. The next achievement towards gender equality, as the UN Women has compiled, was in June to August 2017, where they have addressed the ill practice of child marriage and to actually end child marriage in many parts of the world. That was another step towards gender equality in current times in 2017, including they do talk about how the idea of child marriage actually plays out in the Indian context as being unconstitutional, not being supported by law. And so this is another journey that several societies have made in this regard towards gender equality. Of course, we cannot ignore talking about the hashtag #MeToo movement that that has been ongoing very recently, and it talks about the scale of sexual harassment and assault that women face across the world. So the hashtag #MeToo has become one of the very, very significant women's movements across the world in current times. And as the hashtag #MeToo movement continued, we see that in Brazil they had an Orange World Without Violence. So they actually dedicated it to the hashtag #MeToo, that just to raise more social consciousness against gender-based violence. And finally, we see that in Australia, same-sex marriages were legalized, and this is again a step towards gender equality, this is of very recent news of December 2017. So and this is by no means an exhaustive list of examples, as I said. So please go and take a look at all the achievements, or most of the achievements as compiled by the UN Women in their timeline for gender equality as of 2017. So I want to conclude this lecture here with posing a question to you to reflect on, that how has the discourse around women's movement changed if at all, over the years? So, do you think that the public debates, the discourse, the discussions around women's movement across the world, has it changed over the years? What have been the signifiers of women's movement historically and in current times? So, what were the factors, what were the contributing events that have actually signified women's movement historically and in current times? What does this expose about gender relations across society? So, how has ideas of gender, how has ideas about gender relations changed across societies with regard to the women's movements across time? If you want to take a look at more resources, please read The Global Women's Movement by Peggy Atrebus, and in the next lecture I will take up from cues from this lecture and then talk about the theories of feminism. Thank you.